Now I'm on a ferry moving away from Buenos Aires. We're going across the river to Uruguay. The boat is taking us to a small place called Colonia, and from there we're taking a bus into Montevideo. So, Rodrigo, where is the tour going to take us?
It's going to go in that direction.
That's cool. Hi guys, in this episode we're going to visit a small country in South America. I'm on my way from Buenos Aires in Argentina with a small group of nomad friends that I've gotten to know from the Nomad Cruise. We're going to be spending a few days in Montevideo, and then the others are going back to Buenos Aires, but I'll be staying a few days longer because I have an interesting appointment in the countryside. Something that I'm also going to share with you right here on this podcast. My name is Plata, and this is the Radio Vagabond. Welcome to Uruguay.
The ultimate destination for armchair travelers who are looking for inspiration to get out into the real world and let loose their wanderlust. This is the Radio Vagabond.
So now we're in Uruguay. We've set foot on Uruguayan soil here and waiting for the bus. Let me just introduce the group, or can you do it? You're Nick?
Yes, from Germany. Welcome to Uruguay. Bienvenidos.
I'm Alex. Welcome to Uruguay.
I'm Steffi from the Netherlands.
Leon from the Netherlands.
Awesome. And then we're meeting Stephanie later. Why is she already here?
She went up north in Uruguay for some yoga retreat, I think.
I think she went there just to hang out or to chill for a couple of days, and meeting my girlfriend after 1 month. Whoop, whoop. Gonna have sex tonight. Whoop, whoop.
And it's her birthday.
Yes, it's her birthday
Today.
Today.
Oh, yeah. This episode is brought to you in part by Hotels25.com. Whenever you need a hotel anywhere in the world, go to Hotels25.com. That would get you the best price. Hotels25.com searches a bunch of the biggest hotel sites in one simple search. Hotels25.com. We have now arrived to Montevideo, and Stephanie's here. Happy birthday!
Oh, thank you so much.
The others already did this. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Stephanie from Germany.
Thank you. That's it.
Like, oh my God.
My name is Bob.
Radio Vagabond. And now, facts about where we are.
How big and how many people?
Around 3.5 million people live in Uruguay. With 181,000 square kilometers, Uruguay is the second smallest country and the smallest Spanish-speaking country in South America. Montevideo is the capital with 1.7 million and the country's largest city. It shares the borders with Argentina to the west and southwest, and Brazil to the north and northeast. And then it's bordering the Atlantic Ocean to the southeast, and the river that we are crossing, Rio de la Plata, to the south. It's a flat country. Most of the country consists of gently rolling land and only a few hundred feet above sea level. Uruguay's highest point is Mount Cathedral at 514 meters, 1,685 feet.
Religion.
The majority of the population, 58% of Uruguayans, define themselves as Christians, 47% Roman Catholic and 11% Protestant. And approximately 40% of the population says that they have no religion. In the capital of Montevideo, there's also a small community of Jews. Church and state were officially separated more than 100 years ago, since 1916. Religious discrimination is punishable by law, and the government generally respects people's religious freedom. Uruguay is a democracy and ranks high on the global measures of personal rights, tolerance, and inclusion issues, including its acceptance of the LGBTQ community. Actually, being gay was legalized all the way back in 1934. The country has also legalized cannabis, same-sex marriage, and abortion.
What's the typical local food?
They eat a lot of cow. We know that the Argentinians love their beef, but Uruguay consume the most beef per person in the whole world.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the national anthem of Uruguay.
When Uruguay achieved their independence in 1828, they needed a national anthem. The poet Francisco Esteban Acuña de Figueroa, sorry for butchering that name, offered to write one. And he did. The anthem originally had 11 verses. But since many of them were rather rude about their previous colonizers, Spain, Portugal, and Brazil, only the chorus and the first verse are now sung. But even so, it's almost 5 minutes long, making it the longest national anthem music in the world. So it takes time to start a football game. And speaking of that, like many South American countries, football, what you guys in the US call soccer, is the most popular sport in Uruguay. In fact, the first ever World Cup tournament was hosted by Uruguay in 1930. This actually came about after football was dropped from the Olympic program, after Uruguay had won the gold medals back-to-back in Paris in 24 and in Amsterdam in 1928. And they also won the first World Cup and won it again in 1950, which was especially a big deal as that time they beat the favorites Brazil in Brazil. One of the most amazing things about Uruguay is how eco-friendly it is, especially when it comes to energy production. In 2020, it was estimated that between 98 and 100% of Uruguay's electricity was generated through renewable sources, like wind and water, hydropower, and a bit of solar and biomass energy. What's even more impressive is that it took less than 10 years for Uruguay to get to that point, and that the costs are lower. I hope more countries in the world can take pointers from Uruguay.
The flag.
It consists of 5 white and 4 blue horizontal stripes, and in the upper left corner, on a white background, there is a sun with a face, the sun of May. The sun is a national emblem for Uruguay, and it's also the national emblem for Argentina, and they also have it in their flag. This sun symbolizes a god that was worshipped by the Inca Empire, the Incan sun god Inti.
And that was facts about where we are. Have you ever wondered what the places in this podcast actually look like? I have. So, I started following the Radio Vagabond on Instagram, simply by searching Radio Vagabond.
We're in the old part of Montevideo now. We just had a very nice lunch, and we were inside in sort of an indoor marketplace with a lot of restaurants, and now we're on the streets. Some guys playing drums in the background, and there's a marketplace here, and we're about to go on a free walking tour of Montevideo and learn some more about the city and learn some more about Uruguay. So, Rodrigo, where is the tour going to take us?
It's going to take us basically the old town. We are going to go in that direction.
That's cool. That's cool. We joined a free walking tour through Ciudad Vieja. On our 2.5-hour walk through the old city of the capital, Montevideo, our guide, Rodrigo, shared a lot about Montevideo's culture, society, and history. The original fortifications are gone here in Ciudad Vieja, but there are churches and mansions dating back to the 18th century, surrounded by narrow cobble streets. After having been neglected for decades, dozens of buildings have been restored and now they house smart cafes, hotels, hostels, restaurants, and boutiques. Other buildings are still crying out for some tender-loving care.
My name is Plata. I'm from Denmark. This is my first time in Uruguay.
We start the tour at Plaza Independencia, the Independence Square, where there's also a big palace, Palacio Salvo. Rising 105 meters, it's the most eye-catching sight on Montevideo's largest square, and when it was unveiled in 1920, this skyscraper was the tallest building in South America. And you can actually rent an apartment in there. Wouldn't that be cool? At the plaza's core, there's a statue of Uruguayan independence hero José Artigas. He's considered a national hero in Uruguay, sometimes referred to as the father of Uruguayan nationhood. His mausoleum is below street level.
Well, my name is Rodrigo. I am from Montevideo, born and raised here. So basically what we are going to do in the tour is the old town. So we are going to go in that direction. I have a couple of things to start with. The first thing is that we are at Plaza Independencia, which currently is our main square. Why do I say currently? Because in the past, another square we are going to visit later, which is Plaza Matriz or Plaza Constitución, used to be the main square of the old Montevideo. We are like very close to the borders of the old city. Another thing I need to start with is talking about history.
As Rodrigo is talking about the history here at the Independence Square, let's have a look in the history book. Uruguay had long been inhabited by indigenous people who would hunt, gather, and fish. And then, obviously, Europeans discovered the country. That was in 1516, and it was settled by the Portuguese in 1680. But in 1726, the Spanish took control and founded Montevideo, and only a few indigenous people remained.
The thing more or less was like this. We belong to the Spanish Empire. Let's say that from the year 1810 until the year 1820, Argentina and Uruguay were practically the same country. In the year 1820 until the year 1825, we were occupied by the Portuguese Brazilian Empire. Then the movements of independence began.
The Uruguayans fought to resist the complete takeover from Argentina and Brazil, and in 1828 a treaty proclaimed Uruguay as a separate state and a buffer between the two countries.
The idea was that Argentina and Brazil were in permanent war for this piece of land, so the idea was to stop that war.
2 years later, in 1830, they got their first constitution. They had a civil war from the mid-1800s until stability was finally achieved in 1905, when one of the sides, the Colorados, were elected to power. Later, Uruguay suffered the effect of the Great Depression, but had an economic boom during World War II and the Korean War. They were able to sell wool, meat, and other animal products to European countries and the US. But the end of the war brought a slump for Uruguayan economy and political instability that lasted into the late 1900s. New leadership would eventually bring about economic growth and more job opportunities that continue through present day. Okay, enough history, let's close the book. East of Plaza Independencia, you'll find the busy Avenue of the 18th July shopping strip. And this is where we go for lunch and a cool beer after the tour with Rodrigo.
This is the Radio Vagabond podcast.
Montevideo is not something that is high on many people's bucket lists. But things are changing, and I can see why. The city is emerging as one of the continent's coolest capitals, famous for its architecture, old quarters, and thriving cultural scene. It's only a short 45-minute flight from Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, but you should consider doing like we did, riding the ferry across the Silver River, Rio de la Plata. Most of Montevideo's residents are descendants of Spanish and Italian immigrants, giving the city a strong European feel. If you get there and have time for it, you should also walk on La Rambla, Montevideo's 22-kilometer waterfront esplanade. We were only there for a few minutes because we went to prison. And that's coming up in a minute. But first, the weather. In Uruguay, the climate is subtropical, with mild winters from June to August and hot summers from December to March. Yes, it's south of the equator. It's also quite rainy throughout the year. In most of the country, the average temperatures are similar to those of the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in Europe, but here even the summer is rainy. But don't worry, it doesn't reduce the sunshine hours much, as it mostly happens because of thunderstorms. The best time of the year to visit Montevideo, if you like warm weather, is from early November to early April.
You're listening to the Radio Vagabond podcast. If you're curious about his looks, check out the Radio Vagabond on Instagram. Just remember what curiosity did to the cat.
I'm at the Art Museum, or the Museum of Contemporary Art, here in Montevideo, and it's in an old abandoned prison, and the building itself is, I would say, almost the most unique thing about this museum. It's a free museum. You can just walk in from the street. Before you do that, I suggest that you go to the courtyard of the old abandoned prison and take a look at it, because it's everything you imagined an old prison would look like, with steel bars in front of the windows and beautiful old brick walls.
The museum is called Espacio de Arte Contemporáneo, in English, Contemporary Art Space. It's in a part of what was the Miguelete prison building from 1889 to 1986. There's a ton of history in this building. It was modeled after an English prison in Pentonville, England, built in 1840. So the building itself is absolutely also worth a visit. And you'll find it an easy walk from the old town of Montevideo, Ciudad Vieja.
Inside, it's super modern. They sort of put a shell inside of the building, but you can still see the ceiling and some of the bars. And if you look up, there are some prison cells up there. You can't get up there and take a look inside, but the art itself is very modern. It's very modern. You know, the kind of art where you think, is this really art? Or I can come up with that, but I think it's a little bit like Emperor's New Clothes. If I can't see the robe, it's because I'm not clever enough, and that might be the case with this as well. But it's very interesting to be here, and I'm about to go downstairs and see some more.
You find exhibitions of all expressions of modern art. Some are so modern that I had a hard time understand. But come on, I enjoy abstract art. I don't necessarily have to see what it is. But some of this art was on another level, and in my opinion, just plain weird. And it might seem like I'm contradicting myself, but the weird modern art is one of the reasons why I like going to see exhibitions like this. To push myself to see something new, even though I don't really understand what I see. It makes me think.
Your sense of adventure is just over the horizon. So, reach out and grab it. This is the Radio Vagabond. Gotta keep moving.
It's another hot day in Uruguay, and I just got to a place on a dusty dirt road around 20 kilometers, 13 miles north of Montevideo, and I am here at a winery called Pisorno. They have the vineyard here and the winery where they make the wine as well. And it's a family-owned and operated winery that I have been connected to through a friend of mine who is importing wine from this very winery back in Denmark. And my friend, he's been here a number of times, and he's talked a lot about it. So when I knew that I was going to Uruguay, I said to him, "Can you please hook me up with the family here, so I can get to learn a little bit about producing wine in Uruguay," and that's what I'm here for.
Argentina has Malbec, Uruguay has Tannat. It's a dry, bold red wine made from grapes brought to Uruguay by a Basque in the late 19th century. And the Tannat wine accounts for a third of the country's wine exports. You'll find it in many wineries in Uruguay and also here at Pisorno, where I'm meeting Lucio, a young winemaker in his mid-20s.
Hi. Lucio, welcome. Hi, Lucio.
Hi, Lucio.
You're from Denmark, aren't you?
I am. This is my friend from Los Angeles.
From Los Angeles. Amazing. You spoke, I think, with Francisco.
Yes.
Yeah? About an interview for your radio channel.
Yeah.
Exactly.
3 years before my visit to the winery, Lucio got a call from Francisco, the fourth generation of the family-owned winery.
So now we stepped inside, and I'm here with Lucio and Francisco. He's who I made the appointment with. He's the son of Carlos, and he was busy today, so he hooked me up with you, and that's great because you're one of the winemakers.
Exactly, I'm one of the winemakers. Francisco is the fourth generation. Yeah, he's my age as well, and we were classmates when we were young. Yeah, we know each other since ever. And, I have been working in here for 3 years now, yeah. Before that, I used to work in another winery. And before that, I studied winemaking in a school that is really close to the winery. It's only 7 kilometers away from here, which is the city called Las Piedras, in where we all live. Even the head winemaker of the winery lives. And in that same school, most of the winemakers of Uruguay were created, we could say, in a way. There's only one school of winemaking in Uruguay, and it's where we all studied, so we all know each other, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's great. Was it always a part of you that knew that you were going into making wine?
Well, how I got to winemaking, it's pretty interesting and weird on a way. Yeah.
You like drinking it.
I like drinking it. That's how it started, actually. No, actually, I was... it's a funny story because when I finished high school, I started med school, and I went to medicine school for 3 years. Yeah, and I wasn't going so good because I was also working 8 hours a day, and doing med school, it's not compatible. Yeah? No. So once I told my mother I wanted to do cooking classes. I wanted to be a cook and travel the world cooking. Yeah. So she freaked out, of course. Changing med school for cooking, it was like a bit of a change. And once I was working, I used to work in a call center, and she phoned me and said, "Hey, Lucio, I found a course. It's close by. It's for enología. Enología is enology in Spanish." And I was like, "What is enology?" Yeah? And she said,
"Was my question.
What is enology?" Well, enología is like winemaking. And it was like, "Hey, what is that?" And she said, "Well, the enologist, or the winemaker, is the person who works in the winery, makes the wine and all of that." And my answer literally was, "Well, okay, it's close by. I can go by bike. I like wine, so sign me up." Yeah? So I quitted med school and started to study winemaking. And at the beginning, I couldn't understand too much because I came from med school, so I was in a classroom with books, really soft hands because I was booking all the time. And when I got there the first day, plain harvest, yeah, it was around the 24th of January, so plain summer. I arrived there, they hand me a scissor and they say, "Hey, let's go harvest the Chardonnay." Chardonnay, what is that? Yeah? Well, that started harsh, but 2 weeks later, I fell in love with my group. It was amazing. We really got along, all of us. It was a really, we could say, cosmopolitan, different group. We were all coming from different origins, different places. None of us came from wine world. Yeah, nobody had a winery. Not a lot of us knew a lot about wine. So we all got together, studied together, and look at me, like 5 years later, where I am. And I fell in love with wine.
When he was attending a wine conference in Brazil, he got a call from his old classmate, Francisco, who's the 4th generation at this winery.
He said, "Hey, want to work with me?" And I was like, "Sure." He interviewed me in his house because this is a family-owned business. Yeah, the father, the 3rd generation Carlos, is still in charge of the winery, director, but Francisco the 4th, it's working a lot in here. And they interviewed me in their house. We sat in their living, started chatting, and 3-4 days later I was started in here. Yeah.
We've only just arrived at the Pisorno family estate winery, so there'll be one more episode from Uruguay that'll be out in a few days. In that one, Lucia will share a lot about what goes into making a bottle of wine. We'll also be talking about law and order in this country, and then we'll give Montevideo a
digital nomad check
to see if this could be a future hotspot for digital nomads like me. Before we wrap up this episode, I'd like to say something about the episode I did from the Maasai village in Kenya, because I might have said something wrong in that episode. I received an email from Esther Nikonjiro. Hi, Palle. I heard your podcast and read your story of the Maasai, and I can say that you got most of it right, but not all Maasai are as primitive as you put it. Most Maasai bury their dead in graves and have permanent residencies, though the young men move their cattle from place to place for pasture. Another thing you got wrong is the 40-something lifespan. That's a pure lie. I live in Kenya, and I can assure you that they live up to old age. Rarely you find Maasais in hospital, because they make their own medicine from herbs, honey, and sometimes raw animal blood. They live up to an old age of 80 or even more. So what the young man told you was true. The kind of concussions they make boost their immunity so much that they rarely fall sick. There were times, not sure if they still do, they used to pierce a bull's neck and drain a bit of blood, mix it with milk, and drink it raw. Esther. Thank you, Esther, for setting me straight. I always try to do my research as good as I can, but sometimes I'm wrong. In my research, I googled life expectancy Maasai, and I found several different blogs and websites saying more or less the same. That the average male live up to the age of 42, whilst the women until the age of just 44. After I got your email, I looked into it a bit more. And Esther, I still haven't been able to find anywhere on the whole internet where it says 80 or even more. I'd like to know where you have those numbers. But then again, it seems like you know something that I don't know. Anyway, I apologize if I said something wrong, and for all of you listening, please remember that I am not a journalist or a truth witness on anything. I do my best, but I'm not always right. And with that, thanks for listening to this episode of the Radio Vagabond, supported in part by Hotels25.com. And also, thanks for sharing the Radio Vagabond with your friends. You are the best.
We will now be arriving at the end of this installment of the Radio Vagabond. Please remember all your belongings when you leave the episode.
I'm Palle, and I gotta keep moving. See ya.
Radio Vagabond.
Produced by RadioGuru.co.uk.